Hello and welcome to Cinema to the Letter. This episode's that egregious film known as Tomorrowland. On Cinema to the Letter, we break down the very nature of cinema, letter by letter. For each episode of a film miniseries topic, we cover 6 films that fit a C for classic, I for indie, N for new, E for egregious, M for masterpiece, and A for atypical. Who doesn't love an acronym, am I right? I am Thomas, and I am a very bitter super genius who can't get over the robot girl I fell in love with 50 fucking years ago.
Hello, I am Bryan, and I am not an optimist, but I'm tired and I have a headache, so, bear with me.
I get that. Especially in, recent years and such, I get that very firmly. But we're not the only ones here, Bryan. We have a guest on today. You might have heard him on podcasts like Sequels, or you might have read his work on CG Magazine, or you might know him from, for some reason, being a buddy of mine for far too long. Probably it is Mr. Shakyl Lambert. Shakyl, welcome to the new show.
Welcome.
Yes, hello. I'm glad to be here. This is new. This is fresh. This is exciting.
Yes, for sure.
Just like Tomorrowland.
Completely different. Yes, it's tomorrow.
Yes.
It's the future.
We're in the future right now.
Right, we're in the future with jetpacks and Hugh Laurie's, all our favorite new inventions that we want.
Man, listen, imagine coming to the future, the first thing you see is house.
It's like, oh no, do I have lupus?
Yeah.
But Shakyl, I decided to invite you on for this because you were graciously on our Patreon review of Saw X. We did that. It was not on the Patreon for those antics, the wild fun that we had.
Oh, a great review. I loved it.
Yes, a lot of fun. Would recommend listening to that. But the thing is, after that, we were kind of shooting the shit, and I told you about this upcoming Disney season. And you were very curious about our E for Egregious, which this will be about Tomorrowland, the 2015 film. When I told you that they won the Patreon poll, you were still fascinated, like, okay, I want to do it. And I understand you hadn't seen it before, right? This is what you hadn't seen. So what drew you to being on the show for that?
I mean, the two main things were just, one, I just remember it being very hyped up, especially, like, back in 2015, because obviously, it's the new Brad Bird movie, and he's had a pretty stellar track record up to that point. And then just another, with Disney trying to do the whole, like, adapting a ride into another, like, a big blockbuster, I was very curious, especially with that trailer. That first trailer that came out that showed, like, the scene with Britt Robertson grabbing the pin for the first time and just showing, like, glimpses of, like, this cool potential future, I was like, okay, this seems very intriguing. And so for the reception to come out that it was middling at best and the movie was a huge box office bomb, I was just so curious to find out what happened. Or, like, why did everyone take to this? Because it seemed like almost a guaranteed hit.
In theory, yeah. I think a big thing with this movie, which Bryan and I were kind of talking about this when we were starting the planning for this season, about, like, we both wanted to cover a Disney movie from sort of this weird era in the 21st century where, like, Disney was so gung-ho about, like, we need to make things for boys. Pirates of the Caribbean had done very well, and so it's like, we need to have another Pirates of the Caribbean type franchise, but we hadn't bought Marvel or fucking Star Wars yet. So let's pull out all the stops. Let's do...
Wait, had they not yet at this point?
Well, no, to be fair, when they were initially developing this, I believe they had bought Marvel, but not Star Wars.
Okay.
Right. Because Force Awakens is the same year.
Yeah.
There is a point where they literally play the Star Wars music. So I was like, oh, this must have been, like, fresh in the acquisition.
Yes, very fresh. I'll say that much. But yeah, so it was definitely, like, this is, I think, the last lingering example of that, though. Because after Star Wars and, the big Marvel train hit, they didn't even bother with trying to do new things for, like, boys. And what fascinates you about that particular period, Bryan?
Yeah, this is like, I'm fascinated by this period of Disney where you say, like, they are trying to make stuff for boys, but they're also trying, like, they haven't acquired Marvel yet. and Marvel is kind of working with them, and like at this point some of them have come out and like they're building up, but like this period in the late 2000s, early 2010s where Disney is doing really big projects because like CGI is kind of easier to work with, like Avatar and everything has come out. It's made kind of it more, easier to kind of do big stuff.
Especially when you abuse your VFX teams.
Yeah, which, yeah.
Yep.
But like, this time where they're making like Tron Legacy and like John Carter and all of these stuff where like, it's not that they're original films, right? Because they are like part of Disney in some way. Obviously, Tomorrowland is like a part of Disney, but they are like very interesting projects in that they are very big, like over $100 million for the budget. They're getting, interesting directors to make these. Like, I mean, they got Sam Raimi to make a fucking Oz movie.
Yep.
And so it is this really interesting time where Disney's making like, I don't know, like at this point where like Disney doesn't really make this type of stuff anymore, and when they do, it's kind of relegated to like Disney Plus. I kind of yearn for when Disney was doing this kind of thing, and this is what I find so interesting about Tomorrowland is it's kind of one of the last of these, these types of movies of like live action, kind of things. And it's just such a fascinating period because we don't get those anymore because it's all Marvel, Star Wars, IP kind of stuff.
Yeah, because this was the time when Disney, in their very binary gender kind of marketing schemes, were trying to market specifically to boys, where like Disney was trying to promote, like they have obviously the Disney princess stuff for girls, and they were trying to promote like boys can dress up as pirates. Like that's the contrast that they were trying to. They were very desperate to get that market. Because that's what every boy wants to be, right? A pirate, as opposed to a superhero or Luke Skywalker. Fuck that shit. Pirates all the way.
Listen. You got kids at 8 years old going like, I want scurvy.
Hell yeah, of course. I don't want to eat fruits either. Yeah.
I want to pillage.
But yeah, I think it's very curious, especially considering like how much money they would put into like, and mainly even something like Tron Legacy, which is still like baffling that they did that in terms of like, let's do a legacy sequel to a movie that wasn't that big like 30 years ago, and let's see how that turns out. That, or even like, I think the most egregious example, quite frankly, is the Prince of Persia movie with Jake Gyllenhaal, for a lot of reasons.
What a stinker.
Yeah. God, I saw that in theaters, man. God, that was so bad.
Right. Yep. And I'm guessing, Shakyl, you were also like a young man around this time. Did any of that stuff appeal to you at all at this particular point? Did any of that really like glom onto you? Did Disney ensnare you at this point?
Not. I mean, like I still like to an extent, I still like Disney, but I was never really yearning. Like I was never all that big on Pirates of the Caribbean in general. Like I do like those movies for the most part, and especially nowadays for the big ass wild swings that it takes in those sequels.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I was never like ingratiated into like the Disney brand of like making this my personality or thinking, oh, I'm all about Disney. I still don't fuck with that.
No. Yeah. But I guess before we get into Tomorrowland, we should address, as you mentioned, Shakyl, the Brad Bird of it all. Because this is Brad Bird, who, for those of you who don't know, was the guy who initially worked on an animation with like The Simpsons, directed 2 great early episodes with Krusty Gets Busted and My Father the Clown. 2 amazing episodes of that
Great
show.
episodes, yeah.
Yes. And worked there for a while, and then did The Iron Giant over at Warner Brothers, and then The Incredibles and Ratatouille for Pixar, and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol over at Paramount. So, like Shakyl mentioned, he's really on a high going into this, and I think it's fair to say we're all fans of Bird's
Of course.
Oh yeah.
work, particularly. Yeah.
Quick side note. When I watched The Iron Giant, before I watched it, do you guys remember watching like the Pokemon like VHS, and they had the trailer for The Iron Giant and completely sold it as an entirely different movie than what it actually was? As a kid, I thought it was a thriller until I watched it. It's like, oh no, this is basically E.T. with a giant robot.
Well, I remember there was a trailer that was more like kid-friendly, like almost Nickelodeon-y, where it's like they emphasize, like, oh, he's burping and stuff like that. It's like, ooh.
No, for like that trailer, it was like, oh, this is a Twilight Zone episode, essentially.
Yeah, they did not know how to sell that movie whatsoever. which is a shame because it's amazing and obviously one of my favorite movies. And I got Little Iron Giant right here.
Hell yes.
Hell yeah.
Hell yes.
You're just like at the store at the Blast from the Past.
Oh, that's true. I went
them on the shelf.
They had the poster too.
Yeah.
Yep. Along with some Simpsons Easter eggs and stuff. Yeah.
I mean, this is interesting as kind of like it's his second, and at this point his only 2 live action films. And so that's another thing that's really interesting is like he's made Ghost Protocol, which like is insane because it has like one of the most insane set pieces of the past decade. And yeah, it is just really interesting of like, okay, what's he gonna do next in live action? And it is this movie, which is so bizarre.
Truly. Yeah. But yeah, it's especially interesting watching this considering the real like amazing track record that he had before and just that command of story that he has, which is so great. Like in all of those movies, even like a Ghost Protocol, it doesn't need to have any like emotional heft or interest. Still like really kicks into a different gear, and like I think is truly responsible for that franchise being what it is now. As much as like the other 3 movies before it were all very odd, that one really sets the template going forward.
Like I still go up for 3 as like one of the better things J.J. Abrams has done, but like yeah, 4 really is pretty much the one that's kind of set the modern standard of like we need the massive like only Tom Cruise can do this stupid insane stunt type
Right.
shit.
Any animation director, if they want to break into live action, should work with Tom Cruise because that man is a sentient like cartoon character at this point.
Yes.
But also, I remember kind of like, and I've seen like the behind the scenes of like the whole Burj Khalifa scene, and like it is just that thing of like Tom Cruise is an insane man, and he needed an equally insane director to let him do that sequence because Brad Bird has that kind of reputation for being a little intense, a little, and so that's another thing that's so interesting about them like working together.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend if anyone hasn't seen it, there's a documentary that came out about the Iron Giant that's on the Blu-ray that is very frank about Brad Bird being like, look, I know what I want, and I demand it. Like, he's literally talking to, there's a early pre-production meeting where he's talking to all the animators, and he's like, guys, look, I'm not gonna be, like, pussyfooting around like Disney does. Like, it's gonna be hard, it's gonna be tough, but we're gonna make a great movie out of this. I don't think, from everything I've heard, he's not necessarily malicious, he's just a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like on the scale, it's like slightly on like the higher tier, but not like full on ego, like megalomaniac type nonsense.
No, like David O. Russell abusive shit.
Exactly.
Yes.
We're not. Yeah, from 0 to David O. Russell, we're not up there.
I would argue David O. Russell is like the 0 technically, like the bottom barrel for that. But anyway, yeah. So it's interesting him getting to make this movie. Which let's just play the trailer now because we gotta dive in. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
With Tomorrowland.
With every second that ticks by,
The future is running out.
Newton?
That's not mine.
What's not yours?
The pen. I've never. Ah!
what if there was a place,
Dad, I just need you to look at this. Does it look weird?
a secret place, where nothing was impossible?
You're not seeing this!
Casey, stop it!
I want you to take me there.
Take you where?
Where'd you get this? Who are you, kid?
What you saw was a place where the best and the brightest people in the world came together to actually change it.
We've been looking for someone like you for a very long time.
Why? Did something happen over there? Something bad? Of all the people, why me?
He thinks you can fix the future.
Hang on! You wanted to see Tomorrowland. Here it comes.
So Tomorrowland came out Memorial Day weekend, May 22nd, 2015. What a big summer blockbuster for everybody to enjoy. What a fascinating attempt. Written by Bird, along with Jeff Jensen and Damon Lindelof, who's pretty crucial to like this era of blockbusters in particular, because this is not too long after he started doing stuff like Prometheus and the Star Trek movies.
God, I
shit like that.
forgot. I
Yep.
forgot. Oh,
Right.
Now, hold on, because we have some Prometheus defenders on this episode, and it might be myself.
is it?
It's me.
listen, I know I just met you, but fuck you.
No, look, I get it. That is a whole different topic, I think. But
Yeah, that's a whole side note.
but Lindelof is someone who I find so interesting. I think, like, and I mean, I've never seen Lost. I've seen like one episode of Lost, and then like I saw how long, like, and how many episodes there are in Lost, and I was like, I can't do this right now. But I love like The Leftovers, and I love his Watchmen show, and he's a really interesting part of like the kind of creative team behind Tomorrowland. I find really interesting.
Yeah, and particularly, a lot of people say he was basically the guy who made Star Trek 2009 what it was. Not so much Kurtzman and Orsi. That like he's a producer on that movie, but that's code for he probably did a lot of like uncredited rewrites on that movie.
Oh boy, yeah.
But this was actually his idea originally. He pitched this in 2010 to Disney. It's just like he wanted to make a big modern sci-fi movie based vaguely around the idea of Tomorrowland, which we should note, this movie is kind of based on the theme parks in as much as it's based on the vague idea of Tomorrowland, which is a land in Disneyland and World that's just like, the future is here. Come to Tomorrowland and ride Star Tours.
Yeah, it's very like retro futuristic though. It's kind of
Right.
from my memory, which I love that style. I'm so fat. I love just retrofuturism in general, which is another reason why I think this really appealed to me, because it is kind of taking that idea and running with it in this weird way.
Yeah, they're taking a lot of like the sort of interesting, if you hear anything about the original Walt Disney plans for what he wanted to do with Epcot, where it's like, this isn't a theme park, this is a city of the future that I want to basically craft. Yeah. Yeah. Dude literally wanted to like make a little thing in Florida that's just like, this is my city that I run.
Yeah.
Where like he literally was like, I hate that there are slums in cities, I want to make it illegal to have slums.
Listen, dude, I know you don't play video games, but that is just straight up Andrew Ryan and BioShock.
Oh,
That
it's
is
super
literally-
Bioshock. Yeah, it's very.
So much of this movie though is like BioShock,
Yeah.
which we'll get into some of the
Family-friendly
thematic.
BioShock.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also very interesting considering this was around the time people were making a lot of those like, hey, Brad Bird, do you like Ayn Rand? And he's like, no, I don't. Let me make this movie to kind of explain why I don't. Which is, I think, where a lot of the interesting story structure and the way this movie flows, I think kind of like, I don't know. I'll just put all my cards on the table. I saw this when it came out originally. I was very confused by it, and I was very curious to revisit it. And having revisited it and hoping that like, oh, I want to like make this like, this is like an underrated masterpiece or whatever. I want to rediscover it. I have even more questions than I did previously. It's not, I don't think this is a completely awful movie. I just think it is like a severely lopsided and poorly constructed movie, which is so odd for Bird. It makes me very much think that there was a lot of studio stuff in this, sort of studio meddling, which is weird considering the main crux of the story is the first thing I would think Disney would be like, don't do this. Don't make the emotional core of this story what you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
That's why I'm very... I think that's the main reason why this is not on Disney Plus in America.
Right.
It is in Canada.
Yeah, I think that's a main reason why it's like, we're not going to have this here in the States.
It is. I mean, we were talking about this. Like, it is weird that this movie's not on Disney Plus, and like, I don't know. We were talking about the Prince of Persia movie earlier. Like, that's on Disney Plus, and I'm like, I watched that movie last night, by the way, and I don't know. I feel like they should be more ashamed of that than having Tomorrowland on Disney Plus.
Are you saying casting Jake Gyllenhaal as a Persian is a bit more offensive?
When that movie started, and I did not remember anything about it. I think I'd seen parts of it when it came out, but when it started and he had a British accent, I was like, oh no, this is going to be really bad.
Yeah, like that's a worse movie for sure. Yeah.
When Alfred Molina showed up, I said, "Oh no."
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm curious, Shakyl,
Yes.
because we kind of talked about this off mic that when you decided to come on to this, I was very curious because as I was watching it, I kept thinking to myself, this feels like the least Shakyl movie possible on every level. Like the retrofuturism, a lot of this like kind of dorky stuff does not feel like your vibe necessarily.
The super optimistic like here the future's gonna be great, guys, type of thing. Yeah, it is not my thing, but I still kind of want to ride with it just to see. Like I do like seeing the interpretation. Like it is refreshing, especially amidst like the millions of fucking like dystopian media that we've gotten in the last like 20 something years. So I was again go up for it for the ride, but it is one where it peaks so early that like I was like waiting for it to get like interesting again. But yeah, I was bored. Like I won't say completely bored to tears because I did like I like George Clooney's character a lot, way more than I thought. If anything, I think he's a character I personally identified with a bit more. But overall, it's just it feels like something's very like it feels like it's missing a whole chunk of movie.
Yeah,
it does.
Obviously they probably like hyped up for a sequel or something like that, but like yeah, it feels like they just removed a whole chunk of movie that would have been a much better movie than what we got.
that is literally the case with one particular thing where you know that bit, Shakyl, where there's the home movie and you can hear her mom.
Yes.
Do you know who that
she
is?
just vanished. Yeah, Judy Greer.
Judy Greer.
I was like, oh man, is she gonna come back? No, she doesn't.
She was apparently featured heavily as like she's alive and she's with like the whole family, and they cut her completely out in the middle of the summer where Judy Greer got fucked so royally. Where it's like
Was
this
it the same-
Jurassic
was it the same year as
World,
Jurassic World. Oh man.
not just but also Ant-Man, where she's just doomed to play moms that are on the
ex-wife.
sidelines. Yes.
And like,
Yo.
I love Judy Greer, and I'm so happy when she pops up in any movie. But it is a real like, it really sucks that she's not in more of this movie because like, I don't know, I'd rather have her than Tim McGraw, who I don't have any
Man,
problems
listen,
with.
listen. I have nothing but love for Tim McGraw, mainly because of like that song he did with Nelly is one of the best country songs ever made. But him as a NASA engineer, I'm just like that's stretching a little bit for me.
It's a little, it's very weird.
Yes. But you know what, Bryan? Why don't you talk a bit about revisiting this? Because you had a similar thing to me where you saw us in the theater and you were
did.
curious to revisit.
I did, yeah. And when I saw this, I was not even remotely familiar with Brad Bird. Really, I don't think. I was interested in it because it was a big live action Disney thing, and George Clooney was in it, and it looked really cool and interesting. And so I watched it in theaters, and I was kind of perplexed by it, but I kind of liked it. And revisiting it, I was really curious how I would respond to this because I remember feeling literally split on this movie, where I thought the first kind of hour and some change of this movie, where it is before they get to Tomorrowland, is great. And then I remember when they get to Tomorrowland, it being very weird, and a lot of the revelations I was like, what is this? What is happening here? But rewatching it, I weirdly enough had a really great time watching this. And I think this movie is weird, and it is, like you said, like it is, I think, far too ambitious for its own good, where it feels like there are like not just the Judy Greer stuff, but it feels like there should be more movie, but it's so weird. And like with the stuff, the robots who are like chasing them, which feel kind of just put in there like haphazardly. But at the same time, I think a lot of the Brad Bird-ness of it, like I think the best sequence in the entire movie is when they escape George Clooney's like house. That whole sequence, which we can get into a bit later, but like I just think is great. And I will say I'm not a very optimistic person when it comes to like the future. The future's great. Like I don't really think that way in any way, but I'm kind of interested in like another movie that came out this year that I kind of does a similar thing is Blackberry, which has that kind of intro, which does the whole like, in the future, this is what it'll be like. We'll live in this and all that stuff. And I find that idea really interesting of when we kind of thought that technology would improve all of our lives and make things utopian and great. And I like the way that this movie handles that idea of like the reality of that, which is not even close to being what we thought it was going to be. I do think that it's very weird the way that this movie handles a lot of that stuff, though, because it is, of course, still a Disney movie, so it can't really like grapple with those themes in any real way, I don't think. But I don't know. There's something about, I think, a lot of the more fun elements of this movie that I still find great, because Brad Bird's a great director. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that is so weird and bizarre.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, weird and bizarre makes it sound a lot more fun than I think it personally is. Because I think my trouble with it is, like, for a movie called Tomorrowland, it's a lot of, like, people in cars talking to each other about, like,
Yeah.
oh, we have to go to this thing. What thing? Don't worry, we'll get there. It's a lot of that, which isn't nearly as interesting.
It's Are We There Yet, the movie, aside from Are We There Yet?
Now, if Ice Cube was the lead of this movie, that'd be a lot
Man.
more interesting.
Probably would have given a bit more life than this movie had.
Perhaps, yeah, because if you don't know out there, because you probably forgot this movie existed because Disney's buried it completely, the basic plot of this is we initially start in 1964 at the World's Fair, where in real life, Walt premiered like a few of the big attractions, like It's a Small World was there, and the Carousel of Progress, which is a similar kind of like, it's literally a ride that you go into a circle, and it's all about like, here's what the future will look like at our home, and look, there's like a fancy TV, because this is like 1964, so it's like, wow, it's slightly bigger than the wood box we have. And also there was a third one that never came to the Disney attractions that's called Ford's Magic Skyway, where you like travel through history in a Ford.
Oh God.
Oh my god.
So like
That
you
sounds
see
awful.
cavemen and shit. Shockingly, that didn't end up being at any of the parks. Walt was
Oh,
just like,
man,
no, let's
I
not
wonder
put that
why.
there. For sure. But yeah, at this World's Fair, we're introduced to this little boy who will grow up to be George Clooney, Frank Welker, which is so close to Frank Welker that I kept thinking, like, is this the guy who voices Fred on Scooby-Doo? Like, it's so close. But he's this little boy who brings over his jetpack and introduces it to Hugh Laurie, who plays one of the guys who's like at the World's Fair trying to like House himself, who's just like, oh, what's this jetpack thing? It's like, oh, I'm trying to make it work, but like it should work fine, right? If I just like do some tweaks, and it's like, well, is it going to benefit anything? It's like, well, if it's just fun, which is a weird theme they introduced there. Like, why can't it just be fun? That they don't at all do with the rest of the movie. That's like pretty much abandoned entirely. But it's the whole crux
straight
for
up.
this kid, like just being like, oh, I want to make something fun. And then this little girl comes over, Raffi Cassidy, and manages to fix his jetpack and is like, hey, now you can use it. So now you can come to Tomorrowland, even though I finished your invention for you. So you shouldn't really come to Tomorrowland.
You're a half-assed inventor.
But
Right.
yeah, but the whole thing is that he's like what they call him dreamers at some point, which is really weird. But like,
Yeah, very weird.
God.
I will say about this opening section though, I like the whole like him getting on the It's a Small World ride, and like the pin like scans the laser thing scans the pin, which feels like a lot of like very Brad Bird gadgety stuff in this movie.
Yes.
But that feels like very that. But I like that in the ride kind of opening and him going underneath. Like I don't know, I kind of like that stuff.
No, I like that stuff too, and I like even when we're introduced to Tomorrowland there, where it's like, oh, now he's able to get into Tomorrowland with this pin. That's the whole thing, is like he gets this pin and gets invited to like go into Small World, and then he discovers like a secret passageway, and then he's able to go to this alternate city that's in alternate dimension USA, and he's invited basically to be with all the big thinkers, I guess. Like that's the weird thing, is this movie also cuts out so much about like what Tomorrowland really is, necessarily. It's a lot of this like kind of like mystery box filmmaking, which was very popular at this time, obviously with like Lindelof and J.J. Abrams, of just like, don't worry, we'll tell you. we'll tell you, and they don't really tell you. Yeah. And so he's initially there, and then we cut to modern day, where this young girl, this 15-year-old who's played by 25-year-old Britt Robertson.
Is she supposed to be 15?
She's supposed to be a kid. That's the weird thing, is like, because she goes to like a high school at a certain point. It's like she looks like she's out of college.
She looks fresh, like a freshman in university.
She does. Yeah.
Yes, but she has a cap on, which makes her clearly look 10 years younger. But she's like this young, precocious kid who wants to keep her dad's job at NASA because they're going to downsize and fire him. So she's defacing NASA property and being like, yeah, now this will change something, I guess. And she's constantly in school, hears about dystopia and horrible things happening. And she keeps being like, well, why can't we do something? Let's do something about it. Okay, what? Let's do something about it. And so that's like her whole shtick. So then while she ends up getting, thrown in jail briefly, and while she's getting out, she's given this pin, the Tomorrowland pin. And when she touches it, she's able to transport to Tomorrowland. And when she lets it go, she's not there anymore. It's an interesting kind of, magical gateway kind of deal. And all of a sudden, this little girl who we saw at the beginning, still a little girl, finds her as she's like trying to find out about this pin from like this geek shop where Catherine Hahn and Keegan-Michael Key are the cashiers.
I have to be honest. The store looks really cool. I would love to just look around there.
Oh, of course.
But like, maybe this is me reading a bit too much into this. I find it really interesting that Brad Bird creates this like this museum to like pop culture of especially like Star Wars, all this stuff, and then he blows it up. I don't know. I find that really interesting, and like especially as this is when the MCU and Star Wars is about to like kickstart a new era for Disney. I don't know. I just find that really interesting.
Yeah, it feels like a weird thing that let's do cross-promotion and then blow up the cross-promotion.
Right,
It feels a bit more like having your cake and eating it too to me, though, quite frankly. Because it feels just like, here's all this cool stuff, and here's all these Easter eggs, but also I'll blow it up, because I'm rebellious, even though I'm taking the Disney cash for this. It feels weird. Like a lot of this movie, like we were mentioning. So that starts her off on this journey with this little robot girl to try and, find the George Clooney character, who's the older version of this kid we saw at the beginning, and then eventually reach Tomorrowland and... question mark?
And then just, what do we do from there?
Right. A lot of that. So yeah, I think on paper, I like a lot of the stuff, particularly in the introduction. With stuff like when she does touch the pin, which, Shakyl, you mentioned that was like the crux of the teaser trailer. I like elements like that. There's a lot of elements here that I think are really engaging, even like individual sequences, like the big action sequence that happens at the geek shop and stuff like that. A lot of fun things, but it definitely feels like, for some reason, this was just like very thin connective threads to different sequences instead of like an actual story to me.
Yeah, I would agree very much so. Like, yeah, like you said, the sequences are fun. Like the house, like the house escape is amazing. And again, that's where I think the movie peaked.
Yeah.
And like, the fight, the comic shop was cool. And then even the way they play with like her touching the pin and trying to figure out like how to get to Tomorrowland. Even like the sequence where she sees it extensively is very cool. But again, once it feels like they get to Tomorrowland, they have no idea of what they actually want to do. So it feels like they kind of crowbar this whole thing about like the future. Like, and they want to talk about the future, but they don't really know find a way to make it tangible beyond this magical device that they come up with near the end of it.
Yeah, I think it also doesn't help that like all this really starts off wonky for me with like the opening bit before we even get the flashback. Is like they introduce like a weird wraparound thing where it's George Clooney.
Terrible wrap.
It's
awful.
That.
It's god awful.
It might be it might be the worst part of the movie. I think you could like, there has to be a different way to sort of do that whole thing, and like I feel like a lot of it is based on just like, let's just have George Clooney at the beginning of this movie. America loves him. Let's just put him there.
Especially because he's not going to be in here for another hour of the movie.
Right? Yeah, I feel like that's another thing, and like I really like Britt Robertson in this movie. I think she's quite good, even though her character is kind of a bit archetypal of that like precocious teenager who like thinks that they can change the world and all that stuff. But I think that she's quite good, and like I think Raffi Cassidy's really good as well. Like she obviously like goes on to she's now like a proper actor and everything. But like yeah, I think the cast is really good, and like I really think Clooney is great in this movie. And I think like a lot of the stuff with him, it feels like why they got George Clooney, because he's an actor who can just pull that off really well. I don't think all of it works, but I think like it's at least I find him just really compelling and really charming when he does pop up. I don't know. I like him. How do you guys feel about Clooney in this movie?
Thing is, like I said, I liked him a lot. He's probably my favorite character in the movie because like his story, his whole character's backstory could have been a whole other movie that they just didn't touch on. Like even when they flash back a little bit to it at the end, it feels like you are leaving out a lot of major chunks. Because yeah, he does get exiled from Tomorrowland, but again, the glimpses we see doesn't really feel like that's like enough to warrant the exile in the first place. But every time he shows up, I'm like Brie Robertson is good. I think she's also solid, even though her right. I feel like she's underwritten, but she does well with what she has. But Clooney, I think every time he shows up, I feel the magic of the movie that's supposed to be there.
Right.
Yeah, because I think the biggest trouble with the movie is how we spend that first hour with Britt Robertson, who I agree, I don't think is, like, doing a bad job here, but it is, like, archetypal, I think, is being kind to this character. Because, like, she seems very one note, where it's all just about, like, her being like, whoa, what's going on? And also, we need to fix the future. And, like, those are the two notes she has to play.
Yeah.
Like, the entire goddamn movie. And there's just nothing else, really, to her character. I mean, there's, like, her problems with her dad and like her, you know, that kind of struggle that she has with like, oh, my dad is like part of like this big thing of NASA, but that they're downsizing it because they don't believe in the magic of technology and the progress of the future and all this other stuff. And it just feels like that conflict is not really enough to like get her to be that engaging when you spend the whole movie having her in the dark and also not being like a little kid inventor who invents things, or really is that like active in the story until the very end where she's like, wait, I remember that thing my dad said that I've repeated a couple times about inside you there are two wolves. Which I found so funny. They just do the meme. So that's like it for her, really. That's like the only thing that she actively gets to do in the story. And when she's like our main character, it feels like disservicing her. And we do get Clooney, who I think is kind of, he works especially as like the kind of like dejected guy who once had hope in his eyes. He believably feels like that.
He's really good at that.
Yes, he's very good at that. But there's just, we need to address the elephant in the room of this movie.
Yes.
We need to, because it very much relates to him.
How he has a whole his lover just is a 10-year-old child.
Yeah. So the whole twist is that this young girl who we saw at the beginning is a robot girl, an audio animatronic as they call it, which is another theme park thing. That's what they call any of the robots at Disney, audio animatronics. So she stays eternally 10 years old, but has the like mentality of an adult. And then Clooney, like, obviously like sees her and is like, oh god, you, and like treats her like an ex, which is like really irksome. Even though I do agree that Raffi Cassidy is very good, and I think Clooney's also very good, but the trouble is like that works for Clooney when it's like he's talking to like Julia Roberts or you know Catherine Zeta-Jones, you know, like an adult woman, as opposed to him barbing with this girl. I don't think it's like intentionally creepy, but it just feels like so odd. Like it's a tight rope to balance that, and they keep flopping over that rope.
Man, you know what this reminds me of? I just thought of this just now. This reminds me of the Book of Henry. How Sarah Silverman and freaking Jane Martell have a banter that's supposed to be like friendly, like neighbors, but feels way too romantic, and it's very off-putting.
You just reminded me of the Book of Henry, which I had not thought about since I saw it.
Which is a bit relevant in that around this time, Brad Bird was very gung-ho about saying Colin Trevorrow, great director. He reminds me of me, and he should get more. Like, he's the reason he got Jurassic World. Like, Brad Bird recommended to Steven goddamn Spielberg.
Good Lord.
That's why we have Jurassic World. So, Brad, 2015 wasn't a great year for your suggestions. I don't think. Truly a flop era 2015 for Bird.
Man.
Like you're saying, Thomas, like they are like, it's a tightrope that you have to walk on, and this movie is not walking it very gracefully. There are small moments, mainly like just like their comedic bits, which I like in this movie, that I like because they're funny, but like it is just another weird plot thing of this movie. It's just like, it's weird on top of weird elements that are just in this movie, but yeah.
Yeah. Were you also disturbed by all this, Shakyl?
Oh, absolutely. Like, at first I thought, like, when I saw the character, obviously I thought it was just an actual little girl. But then when she shows up in the comic shop, I'm like, oh, what the hell? Like, is she an animatronic? And then knowing that, like, oh, they kind of have, her and George Clooney's character have a thing together, I'm like, oh no. Like, you couldn't even, like, have the character be in, like, an older body or something like that. But no, they didn't, and it's very, very creepy every time they interact, especially, like, the last scene they interact, and she's talking about, like, how she potentially, like, had feelings for him, and, like, when they were both, like, children and stuff, and you're like, don't talk about this while he's a grown-ass man.
Holding you in his arms.
Holding you in his arms, yes.
Yeah. It feels like they didn't really think that element through until they were, like, shooting it, and they're like, oh, fuck.
Yeah. it is very weird, and like I mean, there is a world where this goes like even worse.
Yes,
but like I think Bird and Lindelof still have like some semblance of grasp on that, but I think like it doesn't work all the way.
And it's not really helped by, like, I think Raffi Cassidy is, like, the best actor in this movie. I think that's the best performance of this, because she feels believably like a robot girl who's beyond her years and has, like, so much actual, like, intelligence about what's going on here. But it's just a trouble of, like, she's almost too good at, once again, having that kind of chemistry with Clooney that makes it so much ickier. So much more
a
upsetting.
little bit, yeah. It is like, if their chemistry is better, it's weirder. But you need their chemistry to be better for the movie to be good. It's a very, it's a difficult kind of contradiction, I think.
Right, which I think also makes Clooney's character seem even more petty than, like, obviously that's part of his, like, arc, is that, like, oh, he, like, all of this resulted from his bitter feelings about having, like, the magic torn from him, and the magic was, hey, you're a cute girl, do you like me? Actually, I'm a robot girl. Oh, everything's fucked. It's all gone. And it just makes it feel a bit more petty, especially when, like, we don't see, like Shakyl mentioned, like, much about, like, what actually got him specifically exiled from Tomorrowland. We just see him, like, being, like, kicked out at a certain point.
They're like walking him out, like like he's kicked out of a club or something.
Yeah,
right. If there was more reasoning, especially, like, maybe more of his relationship with, like, a Hugh Laurie, who was, like, such a non-character in this movie.
He leaves for like we talk about, like, George Clooney not showing up. Hugh Laurie is there for one scene, and then you completely forget he even exists until they show back up to Tomorrowland. You're like, oh, he's still around?
Right, and he looks the exact same age, and he becomes our main villain.
A forced villain.
Truly a forced villain on, like, every level. And his whole thing, which I think we'll get to, because I have so much to say about, like, him. Because I think that's the weird trouble of this movie is, like, so much of it feels underdeveloped, but his whole, like, speech at the end is the only thing that feels at all fleshed out, and it's the least sort of like interesting kind of commentary you can do about our modern age. I think we'll get to it.
Yep.
We'll get to it. But yeah, I mean, Bryan, we've been harsh on this movie, and you liked it. What's some other stuff that you liked that we maybe haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, I mean, well, a plot point. I can't believe it took us this long to not mention that the Eiffel Tower is a satellite, which is the one thing rewatching this. I was like, okay, right, the Eiffel Tower is a satellite. I can't wait to get to that. But then I forgot that it splits open, and then a rocket comes out of the Earth that takes them to the other dimension. And I just find that so unhinged in a way, where I'm just like, I have to respect this. This is so weird and interesting, and like I can't believe that this is a real plot point in this movie. But I kind of like all of that stuff, and I like I mentioned, I mean, the whole sequence of like the escape of the house, which I love because of like all of the like traps that he has. Like I love the laser trap on the door, where like it's like the guy's coming and Britt Robertson's about to like punch him, and he's like, no wait, and then he passes like the doorway and it like slices him into like little like pieces, which is just so.
Dude, it's Resident
so
Evil.
cool.
It freaking rules.
Yeah, and just all of the gadget stuff. Like I love like in the store, the Blast from the Past store, like the time bubble thing where like her hand is stuck in there.
Yeah,
and she has to like wait for the perfect moment. It feels so like that's the kind of stuff that I love about like Brad Bird, where like weirdly enough, one of my favorite sequences of like Ghost Protocol is where they break into the Kremlin and they have that like screen. You know what I'm talking about? Like
yes,
that one.
Yeah, it's like the fake video screen or whatever.
Yeah, and it's all just like quiet. It's all visual, and I just love all of that stuff with Brad Bird. I love how much he loves like gadgets. I love all like the cool like laser gun things that they have in Tomorrowland. Although I love like the gun that the robots have, where it's like the squeeze, like it's like the you know, they all just look so cool.
And shout out to the guy Matthew McCall, who plays like the main one of those guys. I think is like the perfect kind of like evil robot dude, especially when like he encounters those. Yeah, especially when he encounters like the police that are like outside the Blast from the Past store, and he like disintegrates them.
There's that, and then there's the shot where like he exits the car and like smiles to the camera in like a really like creepy like this, you know?
Right, in a way that feels like an audio animatronic at Disney.
Right.
Yeah, it's like a super like uncanny valley thing, and it works.
Yeah,
it's creepy as hell.
And like the whole little thing where he's like, you know, when he shows up to George Clooney's house and he's like, "You have 1 minute to comply," and then he gives that like creepy robot smile. It's really cool. I love that stuff, even though it does feel kind of underdeveloped in a way, like that whole thing of like, oh, they have robots that go out and like Terminator people, basically. They have Terminators, but like I don't know. I still kind of like it from like a sci-fi kind of gadget perspective.
Right, which I think would be a lot better if we didn't once again have all the gaps between these cool sequences be just like talking around like what's happening with Britt Robertson.
I agree, and yet I like some of the banter that these characters have. Like I don't know, a lot of the comedic elements. Maybe I'm just like a real softie, but I was like chuckling during this whole thing. I like that, and that was enough for me at least. Although I agree with both of you guys, like a lot of the writing is very hit or miss throughout.
I'm curious, Shakyl, did any of that like appeal to you? Like what we're talking about, some of these like futuristic things?
No, the futuristic thing I think was really cool. And like as much as I'm not crazy, like I'm not in love with retrofuturism, but like when it's done well, then I can always very much appreciate it. And so yeah, like the stuff that Brian's talking about, like I did like the time bomb stuff, like the actual action sequences themselves, I think are very fun, albeit a bit too brief. But then again, this movie's also like 130 minutes, so I know that they had a lot to do, and yet again, with everything feeling undercooked, it's weird that it's that long. When it comes to like the humor, the hit or miss stuff, it goes back to like that opening like wraparound, because their banter doesn't. I don't think they have the chemistry for it. It feels like they're trying to establish a rhythm, but they don't have the right rhythm.
Yeah, I generally agree with that. I think especially like with Raffi Cassidy and Britt Robertson, where like it's kind of frustrating where you just have like we're following this main character who is completely in the dark and doesn't have really a lot to her, to contrast with a character who feels fully developed, but at the same time is keeping things close to the vest.
Sorry,
Yeah.
like that first sequence when she's finally like showing that she's a robot, when she like tries to steal that like dude's pickup truck, and then he's have her like jump into the car, and I'm just as confused as Britt Robertson, going like, what the hell is going on? Like this isn't even like funny or creepy. I'm just confused.
Yeah, I think that's the trouble is like I want to be intrigued by like a sequence like that, but I'm so in the dark, and this is not really revealing enough to me to keep me interested, that I'm just kind of like confounded. I think that's the frustrating thing about this movie is it's not like totally bad in a way like we were talking like Prince of Persia or a lot of these other Disney blockbusters from around this time. So it feels just more frustrating when it's like you see these great elements and then it's just kind of like barely held together with like pins on like a clothesline kind of thing. It's like barely holding any structure whatsoever.
Yeah, pretty much.
And like, like what we were talking about earlier of like, there's so many elements that feel like it feels like there's stuff missing from this movie. Because I think this movie is very ambitious in what it's trying to like, obviously say about like society or whatever, and like the future and all this stuff. But like, it feels like it wants to do more, and yet it's already, like you said, Shakyl, like it's already 2 hours and 10 minutes, and like it can't do everything, and it's kind of it is kind of a like I said earlier, it's too ambitious, I think. But in a way, I kind of have to respect it a little bit for that, because I kind of always just have to respect a massive swing, even if it does miss in some cases like this. But
no, I mean, I get that, and I'm somebody who loves a big swing most of the time. I love Truly When, especially like for a big Disney corporate product.
Right.
Like I love the idea of like Brad Bird taking that and making an interesting, very odd, big blockbuster with literally like the budget of $190 million.
Insane.
Which we should mention, like a very expensive movie. But it's weird how like it feels so sparse and yet not that intimate, because the movie's keeping you at like a distance the whole time. Because it's a weird thing where it's like, oh, this big, giant, extravagant world, but there are like 5 characters in this movie, basically.
Right. Like you said earlier, Thomas, like, and a lot of it is like they're in the car, in the truck, just talking for a lot of it, which even like for me, which I'm on the positive side of that, it is like, yeah, you want to see the ambitious big world that they've created, but it does feel very sparse, like you said.
And also, at the same time, like, that stuff in the car is not keeping you that engrossed in, like, these characters, necessarily, I would argue.
Right.
Like, there's a pattern that's attempted, but also I'm not learning much about Britt Robertson or Raffi Cassidy, because, like, hold on, we'll get there. Hold on. Just hold on, we'll get there, don't worry.
And for the 5 or 6 characters, again, 3 of those characters you don't see for major chunks of the movie,
Right.
so you forget they even exist. Like, man, whatever happened to her brother? It's like, all right, cool, nothing happens.
Hey, he gives Raffi Cassidy the bit of exposition, so he was very crucial. That's what we needed him for. That little kid, who, by the way, is the little kid from Looper trivia.
Oh no shit! Oh man,
Yes.
okay.
Cool.
I thought he looked familiar. I'm like, oh, of course, it's the little kid from Looper.
He did look familiar to me. I was like, oh wow.
Same, yeah.
But yeah, it just feels like when we don't get that engaged in these characters, it makes a lot of those like big moments very frustrating, because it's like there's a clear, like, interesting idea to them. Like, I love certain aspects, like the design of the robots who we see, like the big sort of robots that are like moving stuff around, I think is interesting. Or even like the whole sequence that like you were referencing, Shakyl, where it's like we see like almost it feels like a giant one shot of Tomorrowland.
Yeah.
In action.
Those little bits are so cool that, again, when we get to actual Tomorrowland, I know it's supposed to be like a big, like, that's it, because, again, the world has kind of been a bit way more bleak than it should have been. But it's also like, man, this just feels disappointing from just the movie standpoint. Like, all right, we finally got to our destination and everything just kind of sucks.
Especially when, like, we only get one shot of, like, Tomorrowland in its prime, where people are on jetpacks, and especially, my favorite thing, honestly, of this future is, like, the guy diving through multiple pools that are, like, separated out is, like, a super cool fucking visual. But, like, we don't have enough time to like invest in what Tomorrowland is because we don't know really what it is. Even like the only vague thing we get is like the thing in the Eiffel Tower that Bryan was referencing earlier, where it's like, oh, it's Gustav Eiffel, fucking Thomas Edison, hack. How dare you have him there? The guy who stole his fucking inventions. How dare you? And then who are the two other guys? It's Jules Verne and Tesla.
Tesla,
Yes.
yeah, because Clooney was gonna go on a tangent about how they hate each other, like Edison and Tesla.
Right. Yes. But yeah, so they introduced like Plus Ultra, which was like a secret society of futurists who decided to create Tomorrowland as an alternate dimension, which the movie barely tells you anything about. Like most of the
Yeah.
exposition that was gonna be about this was like in a short film that Pixar made, which I'd recommend anybody actually see about like Plus Ultra. It's like a full on like 60s style like slideshow kind of thing like Bryan was referencing earlier, which is like, here's the future as envisioned by Thomas Edison and Jules Verne and everybody. Like it gave you a lot more of like what this actual Tomorrowland is, but that's not present at all in the final movie. Like, really.
Yeah. It's so disappointing because like I want to love it so much more, and again, yeah, those teasers are cool, but man, yeah, nothing. It just feels like it keeps me at arm's length from loving it every single time, like every single chance it gets, and yeah, it just becomes more and more frustrating as it goes on.
How do you feel, Bryan, about sort of the development of Tomorrowland in the final movie?
I love like science fiction stuff. I just eat it up, like any sci-fi shit. And I like that sort of opening bit with like the with Britt Robertson, where she's like going through Tomorrowland, kind of like getting like the kind of the tour of it. But like, yeah, it really isn't developed that much. And like, I mean, we'll get to kind of the ending, of which like I have thoughts on kind of what maybe Brad Bird and Lindelof were trying to say with the place of Tomorrowland, but like, it doesn't feel that developed. I like a lot of the like gadgets, like I said earlier, but like it does feel very underdeveloped, even though this is like, it's kind of the crux of the movie. But it does feel like, you mentioned earlier, Thomas, like the kind of mystery box thing, and it feels like they are trying to keep it a mystery, right? Like it's like, we'll get to Tomorrowland, and just wait, when we get there, it's gonna be great. And like it does take a very long time, and it's kind of that Lindelof thing of like, when you get to that payoff, it's a lot weirder than you would expect, right? It's not a very like, it doesn't follow kind of a traditional like they get to Tomorrowland and then they kind of do the normal plot stuff that you would think. It's a lot more about the thematic elements, which are interesting. I think we'll get into that, but I don't know. You want to see more of it, but it is kind of a weird thing, I imagine, where like, I don't know if they show more of it, is it revealing too much? I don't know. It's a fine line that I think this movie isn't walking, because I don't think this movie is really not interested in kind of subtle, nuanced storytelling, really.
No, yeah, I think I agree with what Shakyl said earlier. The far more interesting movie is the one about like George Clooney being put into exile and finding out more about like what his role in Tomorrowland is, and how he interacts with all the other people in Tomorrowland. That would be, I think, a far more interesting movie than like this one. Once again, where like there's a world where like I would love the Britt Robertson movie where we find out more about Tomorrowland and we investigate this, but that's not really there once again, because it's just like she's not finding out anything, she's not inventing something to like kind of help out with anything. She's just kind of like along for the ride with the audience, just like, guess what, guys? I don't know much either. I'm with you. I'm just kind of perplexed the whole time. But yeah, let's talk about the Hugh Laurie and all the climax here, because that's where sadly the meat of the movie kind of is. Where like Hugh Laurie has apparently been in this abandoned Tomorrowland that we finally get to after the big Eiffel Tower sequence, and he's been apparently not aged at all because of his shake that he references, that he drinks daily. It comes in chocolate now, as they say.
Really funny.
It's a funny bit. I'm not denying that. But yeah, then Hugh Laurie basically tells them about like, oh yeah, you know what? Everyone left Tomorrowland because you all were too invested in your dystopian fiction. That's right. He's calling out dystopian fiction. And he's doing that by presenting the horrible version of the world initially as a warning, and then he's like, oh no, you all didn't move a muscle for it, because you all love Mad Max and all these other, like, dystopian future ideas. And it pisses me off. And it feels weird because, like, I get that Brad Bird and Lindelof and everybody's trying to make that guy out to be the bad guy. Because in theory, like, Laurie is supposed to be kind of like that Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged kind of guy.
Right.
Where he's like, the smartest people have to be separated out because you dummies don't get how smart we are. And we're going to, like, make sure to develop, like, all the great, awesome things here, and you all get to suffer on the earth that you created. There's
the line he has where he's like, if we let everyone into here, then what happens there will happen here.
Right, which, like, that's supposed to be, like, the bad guy kind of thought process, right? But the trouble is that his whole speech, which he goes on, like, a 5-minute fucking tear about this, which feels, to paraphrase another Simpsons thing, old man yells at cloud, quite frankly, kind of thing. Because he just spends the whole time being so angry about dystopian fiction and, like, really, like, unveiling, like, this whole backstory about, like, his motivation. And when that's, like, the most developed sort of motivation you have in the movie, it makes me almost think, like, well, you didn't have much else to say beyond, I hate dystopian fiction and how it gives people less hope. So it's like dude, I don't know. Yeah.
Hugh Laurie literally stops the movie to say, hey, I don't like this.
Right. And that's why I was really curious about you, Shakyl, coming onto this, because this is within a week of Mad Max Fury Road, which I believe is, like, your favorite movie of all time.
My favorite movie of all time. Literally a week later, just talking shit.
Right, talk to shit by someone who no one heard, basically.
Exactly. No one heard it, so it didn't even matter. But no, trust me. I thought the hilarious irony of this, of just like, oh man, because 2015, Mad Max Fury Road came out in May 15th, and then this came out on the 22nd. Yes. So yeah, how hilarious the timing is of, like, one of the greatest works of dystopian fiction coming out right after, like, right before somebody going, hey, dystopian fiction kind of sucks, is just funny to me. I couldn't stop laughing for, like, 5 minutes.
Right, especially when, like, quite frankly, as, like, dystopian as Mad Max Fury Road is, I get far more hope for the future out of that story than anything in this fucking movie.
Literally. Like, you could even just take the sequence alone of just when they push the water back and onto the people and how they're free from their murderous dictator piece of shit. Yeah, you get a better sense of, like, man, I feel like I want to do something, like, not inspire the world, like, not on that grand scale, but you feel better about the world than you came in from it. This has, like, it has that whole speech, and then it has a whole montage at the end, because the wraparound being about essentially talking to, like, the descendants of Athena, like the robot, like the new robots, go and find the people in the world, the dreamers. It felt very obnoxious and preachy.
Not helped at all by the fact that ending looks truly like a car commercial.
I rolled my eyes. You know what this came, like, you know what's come across? I saw someone, I can't fully take credit for this because I saw someone mention this on Letterboxd. It feels like something out of the newsroom. And I hate the newsroom.
There's a lot of Sorkin-y bits to this.
Shows of all time.
Yeah, for sure. But Bryan, I'm curious, how do you feel about all this stuff with, like, Laurie and the anti-dystopian fiction element of it?
I mean, well, one, I find it really interesting. I couldn't help but think of Interstellar with thinking about this in terms of, like, that movie has a similar, like, oh, no one wants people who make technology. We don't want technological advancements. No one cares anymore. And that, but also I find it really interesting that since this movie has come out, things have gotten, like, worse. Like, I don't want to be like that person.
Oh no. I definitely thought this.
Right. I'm like, you know, they're talking about, like, you know, climate change and all this stuff, and I'm like, don't worry, Brad. In, like, 5 years, a pandemic will lay bare, like, many systematic problems wrong with the world. But, like, okay, this is kind of my take on this. I find it interesting that, like, Bird has that whole, like, Randian kind of the accusations thrown against him, which I think are kind of interesting because, like the Hugh Laurie character, I agree with you guys that I think he's not a great villain because he's kind of like last minute thrown in there. But I do find the ideas that this movie presents, like, they are very preachy, I think, and they are a little condescending. But I don't know. There's something I think interesting about the way he turns kind of that idea that he has of like the smartest people in society should just be able to do whatever they want in a place.
Free of politics, to quote
Right.
the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Which feels like a very dumb idea of like, guess what, guys? Trying to help out the world is an inherently political position.
Again, it goes back to BioShock. Where
Yep.
like, hey, if you do this, in like 3 years, you're going to have a civil war and everybody's going to be fucked.
Right. Yeah. But I think like the whole like the thing that people throw at Brad Bird of like, oh, you are that, kind of you have that Randian perspective. I like that he kind of turns that into like, it isn't necessarily the fact that like, I'm trying to be very careful with the way I word
Right,
this,
yeah,
but,
this is another tightrope. Not quite the Raffi Cassidy, George Clooney tightrope, but
there's something I like about his idea of like, no, it's just that people need to like care, right? It isn't that people need to like go out, do something and whatever, be like inventors or whatever. That I don't know. There's kind of, I like the simplicity of it being like just that she cares and it's very kind of, again, it's preachy and it's a little clunky the way it's like the message of the movie is, but she's optimistic and that means that she'll save the world. But I don't know. I find it interesting more from Brad Bird's perspective of like, really it's just about people caring, but I will agree with you, Thomas, it does look like a car commercial at the end. And
yeah,
it's very preachy, like you said, Shakyl. Like it feels a bit condescending. But I don't know. I don't love it, but I'm at least intrigued by it in this weird way.
the frustrating thing to me about it is like I think you have the perfect way to like identify a lot of things that you're talking about, where you have like George Clooney, who's the guy who used to be a dreamer and is completely cynical and bitter now, and then you have Britt Robertson, who is like the optimistic young girl who's just like everything like we need to do something and help things out, and you are a smart person who could help us if you cared, and like that's an interesting contrast that would have benefited from, I don't know, the two of them being in the movie together a bit more, maybe.
Yeah.
And having that contrast really develop, and then
I
having
agree.
this point that you're referring to actually flourish, instead of like Hugh Laurie at the end being like, well, I'm even more cynical than George Clooney, so everything sucks, and I'm gonna get crushed by the Epcot ball, which is also an interesting bit of like design.
That was hilarious.
But I mean, like I kind of I'm at least intrigued by the way that this movie is like, and especially the way it's aged now. Of like, I don't know. I found it really interesting the way that, much like Burt Robertson's character, it's very easy to be inundated with this like the world is awful, like everything is awful, the world is ending kind of shit, which is like, you know, just log on to Twitter and that's all it is. But like that element kind of interested me of just like it is very easy to fall prey to that, and I think the movie's a bit very saccharine, very sugary, like, but if people care, then the world will be a better place. It's not handled well, but I'm at least intrigued by that idea.
Yeah.
Especially from Brad Bird, who like, you know, obviously, you know, that idea is kind of interesting in his career.
Right, but the frustrating thing about it is like it's handled from the perspective of not somebody who does live in the now, but someone who feels clearly just very nostalgic about like 60s era retrofuturism, which is like the frustrating thing, especially when you consider like a lot of elements of that, when you actually look into it, feel very irksome and have like we're talking about sort of like those Randian isms that he's trying to avoid, but at the same time trying to, you know, say that, oh no, what we shouldn't like fall prey to those kind of things. We need to be positive, and that's like enough. It almost feels like, what is this, like a Care Bears movie where it's like we have to just care, and that solves everything. It just presents all this stuff about how like, oh, it's awful, like this dystopian future is like making us feel cynical and it's hurtling us closer to oblivion and it's terrible. And the counterpoint is jetpacks. That's like cool, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like, on paper, I really like the idea of that sort of mystery box leading you of like, we're gonna get to Tomorrowland, you won't believe it, it's gonna be great when we get there. And then like that sort of Lindelof idea of like, when we get there, the movie stops to a halt and kind of like talks about its message for a while. On paper, I really like that idea, and I like the sort of subversive nature of that. But it's not executed as well as I think it should be, which is a shame because I love Lindelof and Brad Bird, but I just don't think they have it's not handled well, I don't think.
Yeah, it's
The
also
synergy's
not
there.
No, the synthesis isn't really there. It's not really helped at all by the fact that like he directly contributes like somebody learning about George Orwell in school to somebody beaming images of like horrible climate change to make people feel like they can't do anything about anything.
Right.
Especially when it's just, especially when you consider like in the recent years where how much of it is just like, oh yeah, like climate change isn't like a problem that like one person can solve with like an invention. It's like a systematic problem that's
Right.
inherently like formed by like governments being like completely unresponsive and shit like that. It just feels like it's very naive in a way that like I could see embracing for like a big Disney blockbuster movie. But when you like really hone it so much in like our modern world, it feels so much less like intriguing to me. Because it's just like, well, you're like putting this too much in our real world to when we do get the vague like sci-fi things we get here, it just feels kind of like superfluous. And it makes me feel just more bummed than anything.
It feels like they put it there just because they have to, just to make it like a summer blockbuster, as opposed to like just taking it out entirely.
Yeah, this definitely feels like a movie that like either needed to be 30 minutes longer or 30 minutes shorter.
Yeah,
I think it's its biggest fucking problem.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just that a weird in between where it's too long, but it's just too clunky to exist in its current form. But I do want to say at least like there's some stuff like I do like the production design of Tomorrowland. Like when we do see it, like I like that building, which I believe is like a real like campus building or something in LA.
Word?
Like, added to it. I believe so. You can fact check me on that, but I believe like they just kind of like added on to like an existing architecture for like that main sort of Tomorrowland hub and stuff like some of the bit where like we see like the big one shot of Tomorrowland and we have like the guys in like the suits and they go over like, come on, we gotta charge our jetpacks and then go up. I like these hints that we get.
I love the
like what this world is.
that like weird suit for when they fall. You know,
Yes.
I love
the
that.
airbag.
Yeah, I love that.
And I'm sure you love those big robot guys.
Oh, they're so cool. I love the one who like at the beginning fixes his little jetpack and gives him the little thumbs up. It's so
Yes.
cool. And like you were saying, like to go off of this a little bit, like we mentioned this a lot on our Guardians of the Galaxy episode, but like this is also a time when Disney's making these $100+ million movies, and they at least kind of the visual effects elements of this movie look like they cost that much, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, Tron Legacy looks like it costs $150 million. I think that movie fucking rules, by the way. But you know, it's interesting to kind of get like these movies that at least look expensive and are expensive, whereas now I think a lot of the stuff that Disney puts out looks like garbage. But
Well, versus even at the time, you have like this is not too long after Pirates of the Caribbean 4, which is one of the most expensive movies of all time and looks like ass.
awful.
Yeah.
Truly, looks like such an awful movie.
Like at the very least, it looks like it was shot in real locations for the most part. Like even like that one shot of like Hugh Laurie and George Clooney on the beach. It's like, all right, this is like a real place and not just like a video screen that they just wrapped around them.
It's not in the volume or whatever, which
Right.
they would definitely do this now, but
Yes.
100%. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just again part of these wild swings that they were making, and like a John Carter, where that movie is also very weird for other reasons, but yeah, it's a very interesting time for Disney.
Yeah. So would you say this is like the worst Brad Bird movie?
Oh yes, It is the worst Brad Bird movie. But even then, he had such a high bar that anything under than just like straight excellence would have been the worst. So like it's by like no means is it like the worst Disney movie. Like Disney's put out worse movies within this past decade.
Within this last 6 months, probably.
Yes.
Within this last like 6 months. So like by all means, it is a misfire, but like I respect it. Like no matter like even though I think it's preachy as hell, I do respect the swing. Like you guys talked about, a big swing. I'll always go up for it in some way, shape, or form. So it's bad, but not that bad.
Yeah, I'm like positive on this movie. Like I like this movie, and it I guess by default is, but like I have my Brad Bird ranking on here, and if you take Tomorrowland out, his quote unquote worst movie, in my opinion, is Ratatouille, which is a fucking masterpiece, and like I love that movie. And yeah, he has a really great track record for movies, and I think this is a really interesting kind of like, hey, remember that guy who made The Incredibles? He made this weird movie with George Clooney. Like, yeah, it's very interesting, but it is, I guess, by default his worst movie.
Yeah, and I did feel at the same time, like, I because you mentioned John Carter, and that's, of course, Andrew Stanton, another Pixar director, who graduated from Pixar and was like, I want to do a big, ambitious blockbuster movie. And that one failed, I think, even more than this one did, for sure. And then he had to, like, go back to Pixar and make a Finding Dory. Yeah. And Brad Bird had to do a similar thing by going back to making Incredibles 2, which is a much better movie than Finding Dory.
Absolutely.
But I would argue still feels a bit more depressing to me, because like I like Incredibles 2, but it feels so much just like, oh, Brad, you had to like come back, your tail between your legs.
Trust. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Like it's like Incredibles 2, it's still really good, especially like in the latter half, like the most recent couple years of Pixar. I would say it's better than a chunk of them, but overall, like it still feels like he's missing a step. That he was that energy that he was feeling in Incredibles 1 doesn't really feel like it's as potent as it is in the second movie. Yeah,
I would argue that's my least favorite above Tomorrowland.
Yeah,
I would say, and even still, then I think it's a really fun movie, but it still feels at the same time like the passion isn't quite there as much.
Mm-hmm. Listen, he needs to get back on like the right foot. What is he doing nowadays?
I don't know. He's one of those guys who like he's got like a bunch of things in development. I know he was supposed to make a musical with Michael Giacchino, which shout out does a great score.
Actually,
man.
Yeah, the music in here is great.
The music is great.
We forgot to talk about the score here. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, Giacchino rules. One of the best composers working today. For my money, like The Batman is one of the best comic book like superhero movie scores of the past decade, maybe. Like the score for that rules. He's great. I love him.
His Doctor Strange theme is like one of the few memorable MCU scores.
Yeah.
But by the way, Brad Bird's next movie is Ray Gun, which is the movie he's been trying to make for a while. And he's finally getting to make it as a 2D animated feature with Skydance Animation under John Lasseter.
Yep, he's with John Lasseter.
Oh no.
I still remember when that press release came out when he announced he was going to do it. It's like, I can't wait to work with a bunch of producers at Skydance and John. Brad.
Come on, man.
Brad, yeah.
Oof. But, yeah, I don't know. So, he's in a very precarious place. So, I'll still, at the same time, I'm still curious to see anything that dude does. Because, like you mentioned, even with this movie, which is so, like, lopsided and stuff, it's only because, like, I see so much of that greatness in this movie. It's trying to leap out. It's trying to, like, cohere. But it feels very compromised for maybe a number of reasons. Like, there's a bit of Disney-isms there, but there's also the factor of, Lindelof has said as much, that, like, he made the grave mistake of getting the first season of The Leftovers and this at the same time, developing both of them. And you can tell it feels very stretched thin with this one in particular.
Yeah. The Leftovers, by the way, a phenomenal show. One of my favorite shows of the past like few years, maybe.
It's on my endless watch list of things I'm gonna get to. Hopefully,
it's great.
I was tempted to watch it during the pandemic, but then I realized the premise of that show, and I'm like, oh no, that would have been too
please don't
too much to do that. Then.
Dude, I was on a plane recently and I tried to watch 12 Monkeys and I'm like, I can't do it right now. The virus thing is it's still too soon, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Oh, especially when, spoilers for that movie, it ends with like a shootout at an airport, so I would not recommend watching that on an airplane.
Dude, you know what I watched instead? I watched Malcolm X.
I mean, for a long plane ride, that's a good one to go for.
It was a 5-hour plane ride, so it flew by.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. But you know what? Yeah, let's get to final thoughts, I guess, on Tomorrowland here. Let's get to our final thoughts. Shakyl, our guest, final thoughts on Tomorrowland.
Man, I love Brad Bird, and I don't want to like shit on the dude, especially because again his track record is so high. But yeah, like Tomorrowland is just a real misfire. Like it is a bad, like it's not egregiously bad, even though I know this is in the egregious category, but it's just in the sense of like his filmography, it is pretty egregious. But there's so much things I want to like, and there's things I want to love. But the movie keeps refusing to do so by just not having that many interesting characters. Like there's not a big interesting ensemble. I think Britt Robertson and George Clooney are a mismatch, even though they're both individually solid. Hugh Laurie fucking taking the paycheck of paychecks. And yeah, that ending is just that the whole third act is just a fucking mess, and that's really just unfortunate because you can see the nuggets of potential that there is in there. It's got some cool, inventive like gadgets and action sequences, but again, it doesn't coalesce to like a very good whole, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a big disappointment.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about this, but in this finale, there's two big moments where characters stop all action to have a big, like, sort of speechifying thing. Because it's Hugh Laurie, and then Raffi Cassidy, as she's dying, talks for, like, 8 solid minutes about, like, oh, by the way, let me reveal everything about your backstory, George Clooney, right before I die.
We didn't even talk about the fact that during this last set piece, there's a bomb that they need to set off to like destroy tomorrow. What? It's like a 1 kiloton bomb or whatever. It's insane.
Which is insane to say because I'm pretty sure that would kill literally everything within like at least 50-mile radius.
Right.
Nope, it just stops a big Epcot sphere from doing its thing, and then it crushes Hugh Laurie.
Listen, Britt Robertson should be dead.
Yes. But I'm gonna let Bryan have the final word, as the most positive and optimistic one. I'm gonna be my bitter George Clooney self before he becomes Britt Robertson, puts on a hat, and de-ages 15 years. Yeah, I would agree largely with Shakyl. It's not like the worst possible one we could have done for Disney. Like we could have done in theory like a Prince of Persia or one of those Pirates like non-Gore Verbinski sequels, but I think that would just be a lot more of us just like screaming at dumb details. As opposed to this movie is a lot more fascinating as like sort of an E for egregious Disney pick because of what we're mentioning about like the time and place it was made in and the sort of where it fits in Disney history and even like a lot of the like theme park stuff, which as the theme park guy on this podcast, in theory, I should be loving it. And there's fun stuff like early on like the World's Fair stuff, or even you can see Space Mountain in the background in Tomorrowland and stuff like that. There's like Easter egg stuff, but it feels like a movie that's definitely like frustratingly put together because like I mentioned, if it was 20 minutes shorter or 20 minutes longer, I think it would make all the difference to either flesh out this world or make it a bit more of like a speedy action movie where it's like, let's get to this point, and get to our ending. And it just doesn't quite get to either of those points, so it just feels like a frustrating kind of clunky mess here. It's like the jetpack that George Clooney is developing at the beginning of the movie as a kid. There's something missing there. And sadly, there's no Raffi Cassidy to like put the right piece in the right place to make it function. And like I said, the stuff with Raffi Cassidy and Clooney is so fascinatingly irksome that like I was never quite bored in this movie, but when I wasn't intrigued by an individual sequence, I was just in engaged puzzlement at what was going on at every turn. Truly. But Bryan, be the optimistic boy. Tell your final thoughts on Tomorrowland.
Yeah, I mean, I am much more positive than you guys on this movie. I still do find it to be pretty fun for the most part. I like the sort of retrofuturistic kind of aesthetics that it's using. I like the idea that, you know, again, I'm just fascinated by that idea of like, remember when we all thought that, you know, technology was going to make the future a better place and not like, you know, Twitter, which is just awful. Like, you know, it's a fascinating idea to me, especially kind of at that point of like, you know, the 40s, 50s, kind of that like that age. And but again, all the real world stuff in this movie is handled in a very Disney fashion, even though I did defend it a bit, but like it's still a Disney movie. It's not like this is not similar to this movie in any way, but like it's not first reformed in the way that it's talking about like, you know, our society these days and like kind of the way that climate change and everything is ruining the world.
Imagine if Britt Robinson went on a road trip with Ethan Hawke from First Reformed.
Oh my god. Listen, she'll be just like how I was when I was watching the movie.
She'll offer him Pepto-Bismol and malt liquor in the same thing.
Like, I had to sit down and just reflect for like 45 minutes.
Like, even Hugh Laurie would be bummed out after speaking to Ethan Hawke for a second. Just, Jesus, man.
Instead of the like, will God forgive us for what we've done to this? Will Walt forgive us for what we've done to Tomorrowland or something? I don't know.
By the way, a thing that was edited out of this movie, there was really going to be a lot more mention of like basically him being the 5th member of Plus Ultra, the secret society, Walt Disney. And Disney was very strongly like, let's not do that. Let's not have that be a part of this. Let's not have Walt be like, well, we should make Epcot now. We can still do it, guys.
Man, if we get an Epcot movie.
But sorry, Brian, continue with your final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I like a lot of the elements of this movie. I like a lot of the Brad Bird elements, like a lot of the gadget and sci-fi stuff. But yeah, it feels, like you guys have been saying, like it just doesn't come together. It feels like something's missing. And like you, Shakyl, I really want to love this movie. Like, I really want to like love it. I want, and like you, Thomas, I was hoping to come here and be like, this movie is actually a masterpiece and we need to reclaim it and all this stuff. But I think it's good, and I think it's very weird and interesting. And I especially find it interesting because this is kind of, like we mentioned, like the last really of them doing this kind of thing. Like, you know, they don't really do a lot of this kind of stuff anymore. I'm trying to think of like the last thing that was like this even.
When they do have, they have to sneak it into like another thing. Like, I would argue Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 has a lot of similarities to this movie, but the difference is they just make it like actually cohere to like a Marvel sort of formula, but also make it consistently weird and engaging and colorful,
right,
as opposed to having Drax and Mantis like in a car go to Ego's planet.
Yeah. But yeah, so I find a lot of that stuff, like, it doesn't work, a lot of it, especially in that third act, which I think, like, as much as I kind of am intrigued by its ideas, I think it does grind the movie to a halt, where anyone who was, like, excited to see Tomorrowland, when you get to that sequence, it's like, what the hell is this? This is, like, not what I was expecting. Where's the wonder and the excitement and all of this stuff? And, like, but I don't know. I find it interesting as, like, again, the last vestige of like Disney making $150 million movies that are like vaguely tied to IP they own, right? Like, this is, again, like you mentioned this earlier, Thomas, like it's not really about Tomorrowland. It's just kind of loosely based off of that, which I like. I find that interesting, but yeah, it's a bit of an odd one in Brad Bird's career as well. And I don't know. I'd be curious to see him return to live action, but I'm curious to see whatever he does, but a weird movie.
Yeah, I mean, given how we didn't mention this, but on that $190 million budget, it made $209 million.
Yeah,
internationally,
it was
like
a
worldwide
big flop. It was a
massive
big flop.
Yeah.
I don't know if Brad will get another chance to sadly do a live action movie, but who knows what the future will hold for him.
Boo.
Well,
thank you, Shakyl. I have to deal with this all week.
He has to deal with these jokes all the time. But after that rapturous applause, let's get to our weekly segment, Between the Lines. So every episode, Brian, myself, and a guest, if they so choose, will recommend another film that, is either related to the movie that we're talking about today in some way, or could be an alternate choice for the particular letter, in this case, E for egregious, that we're, talking about for this particular episode. And I'm going to start here with another fascinating curiosity that we almost got as our pick for this particular episode. It was the alternate choice on the Patreon. And you patrons over there at patreon.com/cinema2letter, more on that soon, voted. And we didn't end up covering it, but I did rewatch it in prep for this. And I find this movie fascinating, even though I would not say it's good. I think it has a similar kind of fascinating train wreck quality to Tomorrowland that I think at least people will be like more engaged maybe with The Country Bears, which came out in 2002 and is another film based on a theme park ride, the Country Bear Jamboree, which was opened at Disney World and Disneyland, which I love the fact that this movie was in production and they closed the Country Bear Jamboree in Disneyland 9 months before this movie came out.
Oh, that's even... oh, my God.
Yeah. Yeah, fully just not giving it much room. But basically, this movie is about Barry Barrington, our lead character, voiced by Haley Joel Osment, who's a bear who was raised as a young boy by Stephen Tobolowsky, his father, and his brother Eli Martell, who was little Hogarth in The Iron Giant.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And Barry is like raised to believe that he's like, you're like a normal kid, even though he's like getting old, like, he's getting to like, 10 or 12 years old. And he's like, I don't know, I look different than everybody, Dad. I'm like hairy. And like, well, everyone gets hairy, like your father. And it's Stephen Tobolowsky who's bald, which is a very funny bit. But so he's like, I need to find out like where my real origins are. And he ends up becoming a big fan of the Country Bears, who were in this world an actual band that was very popular in like the 70s through like the 90s, that everyone treated as like genuine musicians. There's a bunch of like interviews with like Willie Nelson. At one point, Bruce is like, "Oh yeah, I was inspired by the Country Bears." This movie,
like pop star.
Yeah, kind of. But so Barry decides like, I'm gonna go to Country Bear Hall where the Country Bears used to perform. And the thing is, when he gets there, he sees that like, oh no, it's gonna be torn down by this evil land developer who wants to buy Country Bear Hall and demolish it. Played by Christopher Walken.
Oh,
our
my
villain,
God.
Yep, who wants to destroy Country Bear Hall, and they have to get together.
Hall.
Yes,
That's my best
it's a
Walken.
lot of
That's all I
that.
got.
Oh no, Country Bear Hall has been crushed. It's a lot of that, and so Barry's like, oh no, we have to get like the money together so we can save Country Bear Hall, and the only way we can do that is to have a benefit concert. But the thing is, the Country Bears have been broken up for like a decade at this point, so he has to get the band back together. And he goes on a cross-country trip to get all the great bears back together. You got Ted Betterhead, you got Trixie St. Clair, Big Al. These are all, by the way, real names of the Country Bear animatronics.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Zeb Zuber as well, everyone's favorite. But yeah, so it feels weirdly like it's kind of like a mashup of like the Blues Brothers and Almost Famous. And it's literally like him going on this odyssey to get all these bears together while we run into a lot of different celebrity cameos. I want to read some of these cameos because you got Elton John, Queen Latifah, Willie Nelson I mentioned earlier, the voices of Bonnie Raitt and Don Henley singing as these bears, and they also appear as cameos as themselves. Yes, Exhibit. Yep. Wyclef Jean.
Oh my God.
And then you got them, but then at the same time you also have like a bunch of other people who like are only recognizable to people at that particular time. Like you've got Crystal, who sang the main theme song to The Princess Diaries, and and Jennifer Page, who sang that song Crush. Like the It's
Crush.
Just a
Oh
little
my
crush.
God.
That girl, yeah.
Oh my God.
The one-hit wonder who was also like put on the same pedestal as like Elton John. We're just like, oh my God, it's
crazy.
It's crazy. It's really wild. And also like there's this whole subplot where like Diedrich Bader, who also voices one of the bears, and Daryl Mitchell play cops who are trying to like chase the kid down, and they get caught in like a car wash. It's a weird movie. It's so much like an insane movie that I'm very surprised exists, especially when like if you look at the animatronics for the bears, they look truly terrifying. like almost like bears who are ready to maul any of the children who appear in this movie.
Dude, that poster used to scare me as a child. I was like, what the hell is this?
Yes, so I think it's not a good movie, and it's not quite a sort of so bad it's good movie necessarily, which we've also talked about on the show. But
Is it
I
not?
find it not quite, but at the same time, I just find it incredibly fascinating that this exists, and it is on Disney Plus. Unlike Tomorrowland, Disney's like,
So
no,
weird.
put this out there for everybody to see. I think it's incredibly fascinating. If nothing else, it's worth it for Walken. Like, there's a whole sequence where it's just like they let Walken do whatever the fuck he wants, where like he just sits in his office and he gets models of Country Bear Hall, puts it on his desk, and then pushes a button so like a giant weight crushes it. And he has multiple copies of this model. And he crushes like in a row. There's just a whole sequence where it's just like a montage of him saying, like, "Oh no, Country Bear Hall has been crushed." And other weird lines like, "This isn't over, bears." Or the bit where he's just like, "Oh, I've been waiting to do this for years, Country Bears. I've been waiting for the right time, and that day is tonight." Stuff like that. Crazy.
Yes.
Weird
I'm
lines.
so fascinated by this. Like, you might actually sell me on this.
I would say, like, once again, go into it not expecting, I think, like, a so bad it's good movie or anywhere near a good movie. But I think go into it just with the aspect of, like, Michael Eisner thought this was going to do way better than Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay.
Which is one of my favorite things.
Bet.
Right, where he's just like, no, this is a smaller budget movie. It's not going over budget like that movie on the water with big ships, whatever. That's going to bomb horribly. Country Bears. That's where it's at, baby. That's the big theme park ride movie everyone's going to go to.
Disney in the 2000s, man.
Crazy. It's wild. But I'm guessing you both have not seen this movie based on your
No.
reactions.
No.
Listen, you told me Wyclef Jean and Exhibit are in a movie about country bears. I have to see their cameos.
We used to have movies in this country.
Oh, yes. It's a weird thing. But Bryan, what's your recommendation?
Yes. Well, you know, Thomas, we talk a lot about Disney live action remakes.
Yes.
And I've always said that there's two that I've missed, which are the Kenneth Branagh Cinderella and the Glenn Close 101 Dalmatians from the 90s. Mm-hmm. But there's one that I forgot, and I think everyone else forgot that it exists, so I watched it last night. And this was the 2019 Lady and the Tramp remake, which I just completely forgot existed.
Right.
And I was like, right.
That was like
they
a launch
remade.
Disney Plus title, if I'm right.
It was.
Yes.
And then I think the pandemic kind of washed it away from everyone's memories, but I watched it, and it's bad. It is very unhinged just because it's live action dogs, kind of. Like, there's a lot of elements where, like, you can tell they just got real dogs to just do the thing, like walk around. But then there's like elements where there's parts where they need to emote, like their faces, and you can tell it's like a weird CGI face on like a dog. It's so unsettling from a visual perspective. And also it's just a really bad remake of Lady and the Tramp. Like it is basically the same plot, but way longer. It's like almost 2 hours long. And it doesn't need to be. It sort of falls to the same traps as other Disney live action remakes of like just adding more stuff, more plot where you don't need to. I will say there are two kind of bright spots of this movie. One, Yvette Nicole Brown, who really breathes life into this movie. And when she's not on screen, I miss her because she's just so great and just adds so much character and life to a scene in this movie. And Thomas Mann plays like the father figure, like the owner. He's like the kid from he was in like Me and Earl
Project
and the Dying.
X?
Yeah, and like
Right.
Me and Earl and the Dying Girl and kind of stuff like that.
Yes.
I like him a lot, but it's not a great movie. It's quite hideous. Ken Jeong does a cameo, which is
Oh, well, here's the thing. When it comes to Ken Jeong, he's either gonna be good or the worst thing in the movie. No, like no in between.
yeah, he's not great. He's only thankfully in it for one scene. What I will say is F. Murray Abraham plays like the Tony, like the guy who owns the restaurant or whatever, and he does a little song, which is kind of fun. But
Does he go full Italian accent?
God, I don't think he does.
Then get it the fuck out of my
Maybe.
face. I don't care. I want F. Murray Abraham going full pizza box, Mamma Mia pizzeria.
He has a
you're gonna be
mustache,
this.
but it's not as like it's not like the curly Italian kind of mustache you want.
Failure. How dare you?
Yeah, but have you guys seen this movie? Did you even remember this
No.
movie?
I forget, like you said, I forgot it existed. Like the only thing I remember from it was that like it was Tessa Thompson and Justin Theroux as like Lady in the
Horrible.
Tramp.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I
casting.
remember. Anything else, I don't remember.
Yeah, this voice cast is insane. Where you got them, but also Sam Elliott,
who
Ashley Jensen,
Sam Elliott
Janelle Monáe.
is asleep in the booth recording it, like literally asleep, where he's just like, oh, I don't know, you gotta just like that's his entire performance.
Benedict Wong voices a bulldog named Bull.
Oh my
Yep.
god!
Benedict
And
Wong.
Once again, Benedict Wong being underused and
Absolutely.
improperly used.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I'm guessing they don't go with the cats like previously.
Well,
Oh, the
They
Siamese
do.
cats.
Yeah.
Oh,
the
no.
cats are in the movie.
Wait.
However, they
Okay.
don't do the Siamese cats thing, of course. They do have the song where like they mess up the room, right? And like they blame it on Lady. They have that song, like a little song. Obviously, they don't do the Siamese cats thing. But then they don't do anything with the cats, weirdly enough, which I wonder why. But it's and they're also like the cats are singing, so it's very uncanny and very awful. Not great. Which and is unfortunate because it's directed by Charlie Bean, who I was looking up. He worked as like a storyboard artist for like Samurai Jack, which I love. I adore that show, and he also directed like the Lego Ninjago movie, which I didn't see, but I heard was pretty good actually. But it's not great. It's just another case of these live action remakes not needing to exist, and it makes no sense why you would do this one. I mean, like, why the talking dogs one? I don't know. It makes no sense to me.
Well, especially like in a modern world where like obviously we don't want to like have any kind of trouble with like animals on set at this point.
Right.
So like their decision is to just make, I guess, mostly CG dogs, but there are real dogs.
You can like kind of tell that they're real dogs a little bit, like when they're just walking like around and stuff. But like anytime they're talking or together, they do the spaghetti scene. It's very weird. Anytime they're doing that, it just looks really weird and ugly. And also, I forgot to mention that this movie is co-written by Andrew I don't know how to say his last name. Bujalski, who made Support the Girls, which is a phenomenal.
Oh, what? Damn.
Yes. Who? He co-wrote this movie, and I don't see any of his. I love him. No disrespect to him, but I don't see any of his like style in this. I mean, the leads are just really mismatched and have no chemistry together. And like, I 100% think that every person who did like the voice for this, they were not in the same room together when they did this. Like, this is pre-pandemic, so they could have, but there's no way any of these people are in the same room. And it's just...
But does it feel like they're in like their bathroom specifically recording lines?
Yes, it feels like... I mean, Sam Elliott especially. He's like in bed with his like night... he's got the cat just like recording his
He's reading a
lines.
Western novel while he's also recording the lines.
Yeah. A bad movie, and also just a movie that everyone's forgotten about because they dumped it onto Disney Plus, which is like kind of unfortunate, by the way, because like I imagine if you're one of these actors, like it would have been interesting maybe to have the like, oh, this is gonna come out in theaters, but instead it gets dumped on Disney Plus, and no one really remembers it.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's my that's my pick.
Well, Shakyl, I'm curious, what's your pick?
All right, so my pick. So I know you, well, yeah, when you had mentioned like you could recommend a thing that's kind of similar in theme, and maybe something like a good version of that. So I was taking a look at it like almost pretty literally. So I was looking at Tomorrowland, a big, expensive sci-fi adventure with a retro futuristic aesthetic that they bet big on and it bombed horribly. If you want the good version of that, watch Treasure Planet.
Yes.
Treasure Planet is maybe my second favorite Disney animated movie. Like it's top two. That and Lion King essentially jump neck and neck with each other. Like it depends on the day. I might say the other one or the other. But Treasure Planet is absolutely like a fucking masterpiece. Just adapting Treasure Island into this sci-fi aesthetic. Joseph Gordon-Levitt as like fucking Jim Hawkins. I love this whole entire ensemble, but between Joseph Gordon-Levitt, David Hyde Pierce, even a character like Martin Short's character Ben, like the robot, the wisecracking robot, you would think would be a character that would get on my nerves, but he was actually pretty endearing to me, surprisingly so. And especially though, Brian Murray as John Silver. I love this interpretation of Silver so much. Like he as the father figure who might screw him over, maybe not. I love it. I love the soundtrack. I love just everything about this movie was just so perfectly done. The problem was the timing of it was just released at the wrong time because I think it came out like either a week before or after Harry Potter started. So it was already just bound to be swept under like the fucking ashes of that movie. It still feels fairly underrated. Like I know it has a cult following now, but it still feels very underrated in the grand scheme of Disney animated flicks. Like Atlantis gets more attention than Treasure Planet does nowadays. And I like Atlantis, but it's still no Treasure Planet to me. At the very least, Atlantis has like a direct-to-video sequel. This doesn't. All it had was like everything it got at launch. So it got like a video game that no one remembers. It got toys. Again, no one remembers. Treasure Planet to me is just masterful all around. I fucking adore this movie.
Yeah, and honestly, I didn't see it in theaters, even though I was kind of like the exact age group they were aiming for. Because like all of the marketing was so emphasizing on like he has a hoverboard that he rides around like a skateboard.
It's so sick. It's so sick.
It absolutely is.
Right. But at the time, I even remember feeling like, it feels like they're kind of trying to pander to me, and I'm too smart for this. I'm like 10. I get what you're doing, Disney. This isn't working for me. And I didn't see it until like several years later. And I think it's very underrated. I think it kind of got caught up in the fact that because it was such a big bomb, it was kind of seen as like one of the movies that helped destroy 2D animation at the time. Which, to be fair, I think is more just like what was going on at that particular time. But between like that and like Home on the Range, like they were like not giving a lot to those 2D animated movies at that particular time. I think kind of got a bad rap for that because I think it is a solid adaptation of Treasure Island, and I do agree with you. I like a lot of the characters, particularly Emma Thompson, who plays like the captain, who's like this weird kind of like cat creature, wonderfully designed, and I think like it's a great blend also of like 2D and CG in that rare like time period, like you're talking about with like Atlantis or even Iron Giant has a bit of that too, where it's like I miss that kind of like 2D matched with like a sort of 2D aesthetically similar CG. That I think I would have loved to have seen more of those kind of movies, especially like this one. I would agree, very underrated. I think in the Disney canon.
Absolutely, and like that last point you made about like the CGI, the early CG is really interesting. Like it reminds me of just like playing old video games from like the PS2, PS1 era, like that sort of like novelty factor of just how like there is a real like beauty to that done properly, obviously, and like. Yeah, this was kind of like, so I, a few years ago, like watched all 60 whatever Disney animated movies in a row. And this was the one that, I know, it took me like 3 months, but this was the one where I remember when this came out, I was very young, but I remember seeing like trailers for it. I think I like got toys from it from like Burger King or McDonald's or something, even though I hadn't like seen the movie, but watching it years later, I was like really blown away by it. Like I was like, wow. I had always thought of it as like a misfire for Disney, and like, oh, it's not. It's a weird kind of like whatever. We don't really talk about that movie that much. It's weird. It's not that good. But I thought it was great. I kind of already want to rewatch it. Like just us talking about it right now, I want to watch that movie. And like, you're right, Thomas. It is kind of during this time of like in the 2000s where Disney is making some like real garbage, like Home on the Range and like Dinosaur and stuff like that. But this comes in like that period of like Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, Lilo and Stitch, and then Treasure Planet.
It's like I'm more of a fan of the post-Renaissance era than I am of the actual Renaissance era. So yeah, like Emperor's New Groove and Lilo and Stitch.
Yeah.
But again, they're taking wild swings.
Right, exactly. And like Treasure Planet is that for me, where like I remember watching it like when I did a couple years ago, like being like, this is so weird. And not like any of the Renaissance stuff that they've made before. It feels so like, it feels kind of new, and it feels like it is kind of a real like 21st century, like, you know, Disney trying to make something in the 21st century. So yeah, I also love Treasure Planet. I want to watch Treasure Planet and like soon now.
Also, I want to shout out because I'm normally not a fan of this band, but the Goo Goo Dolls, "I'm Still Here" is such a badass song.
That's true. Yeah, the moment Goo Goo Dolls played when I saw this, I'm like, oh fuck, this is so early 2000s.
Dude, I'm like, put me on that boat. I want to just sail the stars.
For sure. But all right, let's repeat the titles for everybody out there in case they want to add them to their watch list or have any kind of curiosity. My pick was the 2002 very fascinating Disney film, The Country Bears.
Yes, mine was the 2019 Lady and the Tramp remake.
And mine was the also 2002, the incredibly underrated Treasure Planet.
And on that note, we're going to start getting to our end here, but we got to thank some people before we get to the very end. We got to thank people like Burial Grid for our intro music and all of our music on the show. Purchase his music at burialgrid.com. Thanks to Michelle Kyle for our artwork. Find her at MishKyle96 on Twitter. And thank you to our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/cinema2letter, where for just $1 a month, you get to, have access to bonus stuff that we record and also vote for individual movies that we cover, like at least one of them per season, like this one. You all chose Tomorrowland, so thank you all patrons for doing that. And some of the bonus audio that you'll be hearing in the future, we would have recently recorded some stuff about, like some big releases in November. We're going to be doing that again in December, like a big review roundup thing, where we talk about some of the big Oscar movies. And also you'll be able to hear our top 10 Disney songs. That's our big bonus one. Okay. So from any kind of Disney product, that's including the theme parks, TV shows, the movies, top 10 songs, which we'll be very curious to record. And all of that for just the $1 a month. And of course, we got to thank our buddy Shakyl. Thank you so much for being on the show, Shakyl.
Yes,
really appreciate it.
Listen, thank you for inviting me. Like, this was a lot of fun. I always love recording with you, Thomas. Bryan, dude, it's been so much fun talking to you too, man.
Oh, thank you. You too. It was so nice to meet you. And also, you mentioning Treasure Planet as your pick really just like, you gained so much respect for me with that.
We out here. Listen, we are now. We're square for the Prometheus thing from earlier. We're good.
I love it when an arc can happen in a podcast about, especially a movie that doesn't have a lot of arcs in it. But Shakyl, please promote yourself. Please plug. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me pretty much every social media at Shak Excellence, SHAK Excellence. So yeah, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can find my writing over at cgmagonline.com, where I review a lot of movies, usually whatever's the big new releases and stuff like that. Even though the podcast is on hiatus, my podcast Sequels, I will always plug it because it's one of my favorite things I've ever done. With a podcast where we talk about direct-to-video sequels to movies. That's SEEQUELS. So you can find that anywhere you can listen to podcasts.
Including you did a couple of Disney direct-to-video sequels.
We have. We've done we've done The Little Mermaid 2. We've done Mulan 2. We've done George of the Jungle 2. I feel like we've done a sizable amount of Disney stuff.
Yes. So if you're all curious, those are some fun eps. Great podcast.
Dude,
Can't
yeah,
wait.
they're
Whenever it
so
comes
good.
back, I'm listening.
Yes, I know. Listen, our lives are all so busy now, dude.
Yes. Right. But for more of us and our rinky-dink operation that's still going on, you can find us at Cinema Number 2 Letter on various platforms like Instagram or Facebook or whatever we're calling Twitter these days. Whatever
We're
letter of
still
the
calling it
alphabet we
Twitter.
changed to.
Don't call it no X.
Yeah,
we ain't calling
still
no X.
Twitter.
Still Twitter. It's the dying day. It's Twitter. We're at Cinema Number 2 Letter on all those places. You can find me on Twitter or Letterboxd at Not the Who's Tommy. And you also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.com.
Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter as well, still sometimes, at BRYANDRADE and the number 3. Or you can follow me on Letterboxd, where I'm much more active, watching a bunch of movies and making a bunch of lists. So follow me on there.
And for more of our audio stuff, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts out there, whatever platform. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, you want to listen to all the other great shows, including Sequels, another Talk Film Society show. And you can also dig into our archives and our Podbean feed for, the first 2 seasons and all the old Double Edge, Double Bill stuff. All that is available there. And everything else, if you can't, support us on the Patreon for that $1, it's cool. Money can always be tight. The free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around, give us more visibility, so we can invite more dreamers to our Tomorrowland, where, I don't know, we just sit around and talk about movies.
Yeah, Shakyl, you got that little pin we sent you, right?
Right?
Oh no, it's somewhere. It's lost in the mail. Listen, them import fees are crazy.
That's true. Very true. But on that note, we should at least tease our next episode, our penultimate episode of our Disney series. It's our M for Masterpiece. And we're getting festive for the holiday season. Our big holiday episode, we are covering The Muppet Christmas Carol. Which, that's
Hell
right.
Yes.
Yeah. We never talked about Muppets that much, Shakyl. I don't know. You dig the Muppets?
I love the Muppets. Like, the Muppets are like one of those things where I can't exactly be objective about because I love them too much. Like, even if they're bad, they're still pretty good.
Right. Yes, for sure. And Muppet Christmas Carol, a very interesting one to talk about, especially because I, in my Muppet-loving ways, have converted Bryan to at least watch the first 3
Yeah.
movies.
Hell yes.
And now you're diving into Christmas Carol. Are you excited?
Wait. Were you a Muppet hater?
Well, no, nowhere near Muppet hater. But I had
Okay.
never seen like the movies. I've probably seen the show, but like I more grew up with them as like the kind of they're an American institution, like the Looney Tunes.
Gotcha.
Right? Like
that's fair. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But I've now seen the first 3 movies, and I love them. Love the Muppets. I cannot wait to talk about the Muppets next week.
Yeah, and especially because you have not seen Christmas Carol yet.
Yeah,
So it'll
that's
be interesting.
the next one in my like lineup, and it's very convenient that we're doing that one. So
Right, because you were watching these in like the summer, and you're like, I'm not gonna watch Christmas Carol in like June.
right, yeah, it felt very weird to watch that one, but yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yes. But we'll be talking all about that next time. And until then, everybody, just hold on for the future, I guess. I don't know, or just sit in your fucking abandoned Tomorrowland and bitterly snipe at people when they try and tell you they love Mad Max Fury Road. Like, how dare you? Stop it!
Listen, Damon Lindelof, I'm coming for you.
And I'll
About to scrap.
I'll protect him like the Secret Service.